I always believed that family was forever. That love, once given, was something you could trust, something that would hold steady through storms, sickness, and years. For most of my life, that belief was my anchor. I gave my whole heart to my family, especially to my daughter, Amelia. I raised her alone after her father left us when she was barely 5. There were nights I skipped meals to make sure she had a packed lunch for school. Mornings I stood on frozen sidewalks just to clap for her in parades. Birthdays where I crafted homemade cakes, made with more hope than ingredients. But now, at 57 years old, I sat in a house that felt more like a hollow memory than a home. The wind howled outside the old Victorian I had poured my soul into restoring. Paint chipped from the shutters. The flower beds I'd once tended with such care were now just brittle stalks and broken twigs. And inside, the silence wrapped around me like a second skin, cold, heavy, unforgiving. It wasn't the loneliness that hurt most. Not the aching joints, not the diagnosis from the doctor 2 months ago that left me dizzy and small. It was the realization that Amelia, the girl I had built my life around, saw me not as a mother anymore, but as an obstacle. I still remember the night everything shifted. It had been a chilly March evening, the kind where the savannah air bites through even the thickest sweater. Amelia had come over for dinner, a rare event these days. She barely touched the chicken pot pie I had baked from scratch, an old family recipe she once begged me for every birthday. She spent most of the meal scrolling on her phone, responding to messages with smiles she didn't offer me. And then, as she sipped her wine and pushed away her plate, she said it. A casual, offhand remark tossed into the air like an afterthought. Honestly, Mom, if you're going to be sick for a long time, maybe you should consider selling the house now, while it's still worth something. I blinked. The words didn't land all at once. It was like standing too close to a bomb. You see the flash before you hear the blast. She laughed lightly afterward, waving her hand as if to soften it. It's just smart planning, she added, twirling her wine glass by the stem. Not like you're using me upstairs anymore anyway. I sat frozen, my fork midair, as her words echoed inside me louder than any storm. The home I had built, the sacrifices stitched into every inch of wood and stone, she was already imagining it without me. Not after me. Without me. Amelia wasn't worried about my health. She was worried about the asset. The realization was so sharp, I almost gasped. How long had she been thinking like this? Was this why she rarely visited? Why the calls grew fewer, shorter, more perfunctory? I had been blind. Willingly blind. When she left that night with barely a kiss on the cheek and a distracted "love you, Mom," I sat in the dark kitchen long after the sound of her car faded down the gravel driveway. The walls, once papered with photographs and handprints in paint, seemed to close in. The clock ticked a little too loudly. The old floors groaned under no one's weight. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was alone, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. I had given everything, every last ounce of love, strength, patience, and now there was nothing left for me, not even gratitude. The next morning, I stood at the window, clutching a cup of cold coffee as I watched the neighborhood kids ride their bikes down the cracked sidewalks. Their laughter floated up to the window, unburdened, innocent. I remembered when Amelia was that small, when just a smile or a band-aid could make her world right again. Now she looked at me and saw inconvenience. And worse, she was already planning her life without me in it. The diagnosis loomed over me like a storm cloud. It wasn't terminal, not yet. But the doctors were clear. My body was fighting a losing battle. Slow, inevitable. I would need help soon, care, support. The very things I had once given without hesitation, I now realized I could not expect in return. The betrayal sat heavy in my chest. But something else began to stir, too. Something deeper. Something fierce. If Amelia wanted me gone so badly, if she thought she could simply sell off my life with a nod and a signature, she was wrong. Dead wrong. I wasn't going to just disappear. I wasn't going to let her or anyone erase me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the faintest flicker of power within me. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The days after that dinner blurred into one another, heavy and gray. I went through the motions, making tea I didn't drink, folding laundry I never wore, dusting furniture no one would sit on. The house, once brimming with life, felt like a museum now, a place frozen in time, curated by a woman who no longer existed. But underneath the numbness, a quiet resolve was growing. It started small, like the first crack in a dam. A thought, a whisper. What if I didn't just let this happen? At first, it felt shameful. I was her mother. Wasn't I supposed to love her unconditionally? Wasn't forgiveness part of the job? But the image of Amelia's smirk over her wine glass, the ease with which she talked about my home, my life, like a chess piece she was already moving off the board, burned in my mind. No, unconditional love didn't mean unconditional surrender. One rainy afternoon, I found myself standing in the hallway by the old curio cabinet. Inside, it were dozens of little mementos. The clay handprint Amelia made in preschool. The yellowed photos from her high school graduation. The corsage I wore to her college commencement, now brittle and faded. All relics of a life spent giving, building, believing. I opened the glass door slowly, the hinges creaking like a protest. One by one, I began taking things out, setting them carefully on the polished wood floor. Not because I was cleaning, because I needed to see it all. Everything I had built, everything I had risked losing. And I made a silent promise. I will not let this house or my life be stolen. That night, I dug through old paperwork in the den, pulling out every deed, every will, every insurance policy. My fingers, stiff from arthritis, shook as I sifted through the decades of my life in manila folders. And that's when I found it, the dusty, half-forgotten document tucked in the back of a drawer. The living trust agreement. It had been drawn up years ago, after my mother passed and I inherited the house. A friend of hers, an old family lawyer named Mr. Callahan, had insisted I protect my assets. At the time, it felt paranoid. Now it felt like fate. As I read through the dense legal jargon, my heart began to pound. There were loopholes, opportunities, quiet little landmines buried in the fine print, ways to delay, to tie things up, to fight back. If Amelia thought she could swoop in and sell the house the moment I was too sick to stop her, she was in for a surprise. I stayed up late into the night drafting a letter, carefully outlining my intentions. Not to Amelia, no. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. This was for Mr. Callahan. I needed advice, a strategy. The next morning, I mailed the letter, feeling a weight lift from my chest as the mailbox door slammed shut. The first move had been made. I wasn't just sitting and waiting for my fate anymore. I was playing the long game. The days that followed were filled with small, careful steps. I made an appointment with Mr. Callahan under the guise of reviewing my estate. I updated my healthcare proxy and power of attorney. Names Amelia had no idea I was changing. I contacted an old real estate agent, pretending to inquire about the market, but really gathering intel. And all the while, I smiled and nodded whenever Amelia called, pretending nothing was amiss. She never suspected a thing. In fact, she seemed to visit more often now, bringing me casseroles I didn't ask for, suggesting we talk about the future over cups of untouched tea. Every time she sat on my sofa, flipping through her phone with that familiar distracted smile, it felt like a rehearsal, like she was practicing what grief would look like. Polishing her performance for the day, she'd get to call the realtor and sign the paperwork. But what she didn't realize was, I was rehearsing too. I was preparing to take back my life, inch by inch. And when the time came, it wouldn't just be a quiet refusal. It would be a reckoning. One evening, as the sun sank low over the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees, I sat on the porch with a notebook in my lap. I wrote down 3 things. Reclaim my power. Protect the house. Make Amelia see what she almost destroyed. I underlined the last 1 3 times, because it wasn't just about the property. It was about dignity, about making sure that when the dust settled, I wouldn't be the forgotten woman in the kitchen, the invisible ghost in the family photos. No, when I was done, she would know exactly who I was, and she would never, ever forget it. The war hadn't started yet, but it was coming, and for once in my life, I was ready. Spring slid quietly into Savannah that year, unnoticed by most. The dogwoods bloomed like small white flames against the gray sky, and the air turned heavy with the scent of wisteria. But inside my house, a different kind of season was unfolding, a season of strategy, of waiting. I moved through the days deliberately, careful not to show my hand. If Amelia sensed even a ripple of resistance, she would adapt. She would push harder, faster, before I was ready. I couldn't afford that. Instead, I let her think I was slipping, that I was growing weaker, that the illness was draining more than my strength. It was draining my will. It wasn't hard to sell the illusion. The sickness was real enough after all. Some days, my body betrayed me with its shaking hands, its shallow breaths. But my mind was sharper than it had been in years. It became a kind of cruel theater. Amelia would show up with shopping bags and brochures for senior living communities, her voice syrupy and sweet. "Mom, they have a wellness center and daily activities. You'd love it there. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." I would smile thinly, nod as if considering, all the while feeling a slow burn coil in my chest. She thought she was being clever. She thought she was guiding me gently toward surrender. But what she didn't realize was, every brochure she handed me was another nail in the coffin of my patience. Behind the scenes, my preparations intensified. Mr. Callahan proved to be an invaluable ally. After reviewing the trust documents, he confirmed what I had suspected. The house was legally protected in ways Amelia hadn't anticipated. We met discreetly in the back corner of a dusty law office that smelled of old books and stronger whiskey. He peered over his reading glasses at me, a smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. "You know," he said, tapping the papers, "it's rare to see someone plan this far ahead. You thought you were just being cautious back then. Turns out, you were protecting your future self." I nodded, feeling the strange weight of gratitude and sorrow settle over me. "Is it wrong to fight her on this?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. Mr. Callahan shook his head slowly. "It's not wrong to protect what you built, Clara. It's not wrong to demand to be seen." Those words stayed with me long after I left his office. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was recognition. I wasn't the fragile old woman Amelia thought she could quietly move into a nursing home while she signed my life away. I was still here, and I was done being invisible. 2 weeks later, the first real blow came, not from me, but from the bank. Amelia had tried to get a pre-approval letter for the sale of the house. Somehow, she thought she could start the process without my explicit signature, probably assuming I'd be too tired or too confused to protest when the time came. But the loan officer, bound by the living trust terms, called me directly. When I picked up the phone, the woman's voice was polite, but puzzled. "Mrs. Mitchell, we just needed to verify. You are the sole trustee and decision-maker regarding the property, correct?" I smiled, the first real smile I had felt in months. "Yes," I said firmly, "and there will be no sale." There was a pause. I could almost hear the clattering of Amelia's carefully laid plans falling apart on the other end of the line. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair, breathing deeply. The first domino had fallen. She would find out soon enough. That evening, Amelia arrived earlier than usual, her car screeching slightly as she parked too fast in the driveway. She stormed into the house, her high heels clicking furiously against the hardwood floor. "Why didn't you tell me the house is locked under some stupid trust?" she demanded, throwing her purse onto the table. I looked up from my knitting, a project I had no intention of finishing, feigning innocence. "I thought you knew," I said, my voice sweet and steady. "It's been that way since before you were born." Her face twisted, a flush creeping up her neck. "You should have told me. I've been working for months to line things up. Do you even realize how much you're complicating everything?" I tilted my head slightly, studying her. In that moment, I saw not my daughter, the chubby-cheeked toddler who once clung to my skirts, but a woman I barely recognized. Calculating, entitled, panicked. Good. Let her panic. I pressed a hand to my chest and gave a soft, weary sigh. "I'm sorry, Amelia. I just assumed you were more interested in, well, me, than the house." The jab landed. I saw it in the way she flinched, the way her eyes darted away. For a moment, Just a moment, I almost softened. But then I remembered the brochures. The casual way she had spoken of moving me out like unwanted furniture. No, she had made her choices. Now it was my turn. That night, after she slammed the door and drove away without a goodbye, I sat on the porch and watched the fireflies blink against the velvet sky. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring the bitter warmth. The calm before the storm was over. The war had begun, and I wasn't afraid anymore. The morning after Amelia's outburst, the house was unnervingly quiet. Sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing lazily in the air. I sat at the table, sipping my tea, real tea this time, strong and bitter, while staring at the stack of papers Mr. Callahan had given me. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time for the first strike. I spent the next few days setting things into motion. First, I contacted an old friend from my teaching days, a woman named Diane Whitmore. Diane had retired years ago, but now volunteered with the Community Housing Board, an organization known for fighting predatory property sales and protecting senior homeowners. When I explained my situation in broad strokes, Diane's voice sharpened. "You're not alone in this, Clara," she said. "You have more power than you think." Within hours, Diane had connected me to a network of advocates, lawyers, mediators, even a few sympathetic journalists who were always looking for stories about family betrayals and wrongful property grabs. I wasn't planning to air my laundry publicly yet, but it was good to know I had options. I tucked that card into my back pocket. Next came the financial trap. Quietly, methodically, I began shifting assets around. I opened a separate account under the protection of the Living Trust, moved what little savings I had out of Amelia's reach, changed passwords, closed old credit cards, updated security questions that only I would know the answers to. It felt cold, clinical, not like the mother I used to be, the woman who had once memorized Amelia's favorite ice cream flavor, the one who stayed up all night sewing costumes for her school plays. But that woman was gone. She had been used up, emptied out, discarded. What remained was someone Amelia hadn't anticipated. A woman who knew how to fight when pushed to the edge. The third step was the most painful and the most necessary. I updated my will. I sat with Mr. Callahan in the heavy silence of his office, pen in hand, as he slid the final version across the desk toward me. Amelia wasn't just losing access to the house. She was losing everything. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on my chest like a stone. I thought of the way she had laughed that night at dinner, sipping her wine while plotting my disappearance. I thought of the brochures for nursing homes, the casual way she brushed off my memories, my legacy, my worth. And I nodded. "I'm sure." The new will designated the house, and everything inside it, to a foundation dedicated to supporting women starting over after family betrayal and hardship. My legacy would go to strangers who knew the meaning of gratitude, not to a daughter who saw me only as a means to an end. The final move came sooner than expected. 3 days after our last argument, Amelia showed up unannounced. I watched from the window as she marched up the steps, determination carved into every line of her body. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was it, the confrontation I had been preparing for. I opened the door before she could knock. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. I followed her into the living room, where she spun on her heel to face me. "I talked to the realtor," she began. "They said you're refusing to even discuss the sale." "Mom, you're being ridiculous. This house is falling apart. You can't live here alone." I crossed my arms, leaning casually against the doorframe. "I know exactly what this house is, Amelia. It's not falling apart. You just want it gone so you can cash out." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "I've updated my will," I said, voice clear, steady. "The house isn't going to you. It's not going to anyone in the family. It's being donated." For a moment, she just stared at me, stunned. Then the anger flooded her face. "You can't do that. After everything I've done for you." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't feel like mine. "Everything you've done for me?" I stepped closer, feeling the fire rise in my chest. "You mean the casseroles you drop off once a week like a guilt offering? The brochures for nursing homes? The plans you made behind my back. Her mouth opened, then closed again. No words came out. I pressed the advantage. I'm not a burden, Amelia. I'm not a prize to be claimed when I die. And if you think you can bully or guilt trip me into handing over my life's work, you are sadly mistaken. She shook her head, furious. You're being so dramatic. I was just trying to help. I smiled coldly. Maybe you should have started by asking what I wanted, not what you thought you could take. There it was. The truth laid bare between us like a shattered mirror. She saw it too. I could tell. Saw it, and for the first time, realized she had underestimated me. Badly. Amelia stormed out without another word, her heels hammering against the porch steps. I stood in the doorway, watching her go, feeling the air shift around me like the first cool gust before a summer storm. I wasn't afraid anymore. The first battle was won. The war was far from over. But for the first time in a long, long time, I was fighting for me, and I was winning. The storm I had been bracing for came faster than I expected. 2 days after Amelia stormed out, I received a notice in the mail, a formal request for guardianship proceedings. My hands trembled as I held the thick envelope. Inside, pages of legal jargon spelled it out plainly. Amelia was petitioning the court to declare me incompetent to manage my own affairs. If she succeeded, she wouldn't need my permission to sell the house. She would own me, legally. My chest tightened with something deeper than fear. Betrayal so deep it scraped the soul raw. My own daughter was trying to erase me, not out of love, not out of concern, but out of greed. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, documents, whispered strategy meetings in Mr. Callahan's office. I sat through long consultations with doctors, gathering medical opinions to prove my competence. I submitted bank statements, utility bills, appointment logs, evidence that I was still perfectly capable of managing my life, even if my body wasn't as strong as it once was. But more than anything, I prepared myself mentally. Amelia wasn't just attacking my house anymore. She was attacking my very identity. I thought back to the nights I spent sitting by her bedside, as a child when she had fevers that scared me to death, to the homemade Halloween costumes, the late-night drives to pick her up from bad dates. All of it seemed like a cruel joke now. But crying wouldn't save me. Grieving wouldn't save me. Fighting would. The court hearing was set for a Friday afternoon. I wore my best dress, a simple navy blue shift Amelia had given me years ago, back when gifts still meant something. I pinned my hair up neatly, dabbed a little powder on my cheeks to hide the hollows left by sleepless nights. Mr. Callahan met me outside the courthouse steps. He gave me a tight nod, his hand steady on my elbow. You're ready for this, he said. Just remember, you have nothing to prove. You know who you are. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected. Amelia sat at the opposite table, flanked by a polished young lawyer in a charcoal suit. She didn't meet my eyes. Good. I didn't want her apologies. Not anymore. I wanted justice. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air, called the proceeding to order. Amelia's lawyer spoke first, weaving a delicate web of concern. Mrs. Mitchell's recent medical diagnosis raises serious questions about her ability to manage her estate responsibly, he said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. Our client, her daughter, only wishes to ensure that her mother's needs are met with dignity and care. I almost laughed aloud at the word dignity, because nothing about stealing someone's life while they were still breathing screamed dignity to me. When it was my turn, I rose slowly but steadily to my feet. I spoke plainly, clearly, without bitterness, but with a firmness that came from years of surviving heartbreaks bigger than Amelia could imagine. I told the court about my daily routines, my finances, my plans for the house, not to sell it off for cash, but to leave a legacy of hope for women who needed it most. I ended by reading a letter I had written the night before, hands shaking over the kitchen table. I am not a burden. I am not a project to be managed. I am a woman who built a life with her own hands, and I refuse to be erased. When I sat down, the courtroom was silent. Even Amelia looked rattled. Good. Let her feel what it was like to be powerless. The judge called for a short recess to review the documents. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, while Amelia and her lawyer whispered urgently at their table. I didn't need to hear them to know what they were saying. The tide had turned. They could feel it. When the judge returned, her verdict was swift. She denied Amelia's petition. Mrs. Mitchell is fully capable of managing her own affairs, the judge said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a gavel strike. This petition was not made out of genuine concern, but appears to be motivated by personal interest. And just like that, it was over. I had won. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt impossibly bright. Mr. Callahan clapped me on the back, a rare smile lighting up his usually stern face. You did it, Clara. You saved yourself. I nodded slowly, feeling the truth of it settle deep into my bones. I wasn't just saving the house. I was saving the woman who lived inside it. The woman who had almost been erased. The woman who refused to be. But even as I walked away from the courthouse, I knew the battle wasn't truly over. Amelia wasn't the kind to accept defeat quietly. And part of me, an instinct honed sharper by betrayal, knew she was already plotting her next move. But I was ready. This time, I wouldn't be caught off guard. This time, I would meet her head on and win again. Victory in the courthouse tasted sweet, briefly. For a few days afterward, the house felt lighter, almost as if it was breathing with me. I tended the rose bushes out front, swept the porch, even polished the antique doorknobs that had dulled with time. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, it was over. But deep down, I knew better. People like Amelia didn't quit. They adapted. It started small. An unfamiliar car parked across the street for hours at a time. Phone calls that rang once, then hung up before I could answer. Flyers slipped under my door. Cash buyers offering to relieve me of the burden of my home. At first, I brushed it off as coincidence. But then, late one evening, a knock rattled the front door. I pulled my robe tighter around me and peered through the peephole. A man in a crisp suit stood there, holding a clipboard. Mrs. Mitchell, he called through the door. I'm here regarding an inquiry about selling the property. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. I knew who was behind it. Amelia. She hadn't just tried to take the house through the courts. Now, she was trying to bully me out. Pressure me with offers, spook me with strangers, wear me down until I surrendered. It was a new war, one fought in shadows and whispers. But she had underestimated something vital. I had already faced my worst fear, being abandoned, and survived it. I wasn't going to flinch now. I called Mr. Callahan the next morning. She's changed tactics, I said, pacing the kitchen. It's intimidation now. Subtle, but it's there. He sighed heavily over the line. She's hoping you'll panic and agree to sell voluntarily. It's dirty, but not illegal unless she crosses certain lines. I gripped the phone tighter. What do I do? His voice sharpened. You document everything. Every flyer, every strange car, every unwanted visitor. Build your case. And when you're ready, we strike back. I hung up, heart pounding, but a new kind of determination thrumming under my skin. I wouldn't just play defense this time. I would set the trap myself. The next day, I took a walk through the house, room by room, notebook in hand. It wasn't just a building. It was a living archive of everything I had sacrificed. The kitchen where I burned my first Thanksgiving turkey, laughing until Amelia sprayed cranberry sauce across the walls. The sunroom where I spent afternoons teaching her to read, our heads bent together over tattered fairy tale books. The porch swing where, one summer night, she had sobbed into my shoulder over her first broken heart. The memories clung to the walls like ivy, impossible to tear down. And yet Amelia had tried to reduce it all to square footage and dollar signs. My fingers tightened around the pen. No more. If she wanted to fight for this house, she was going to have to step into the light. That evening, as twilight bled into darkness, I did something that made my hands shake with fear and excitement. I called a reporter. Not a flashy TV journalist. Not someone looking for scandal. A quiet, respected local writer who specialized in community stories. I told her everything. Not the messy family drama, not yet. But the broader story, an aging woman fighting to protect her home, her dignity, her right to exist on her own terms. She listened intently, her voice low and encouraging. At the end of the call, she asked, "Would you be willing to let me come over? Maybe take a few photos? Tell the story through your eyes." I hesitated. Letting someone in, letting them see the cracks, terrified me. But hiding had got me nowhere. I squared my shoulders. "Yes, come tomorrow." When I hung up, a strange feeling washed over me. Not fear, but something fiercer. Hope. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't playing by Amelia's rules. I was setting my own. And I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for my story, my voice, myself. Late that night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the house settled around me like a worn blanket, I stood at the window and watched the unfamiliar car parked across the street. I smiled to myself, a small, secret smile. "Let her watch," I whispered into the dark, because the next chapter wasn't going to be written by her. It was going to be written by me. And this time it would be unforgettable. The reporter, Anna Lawson, arrived the next morning just as the dew was still clinging to the grass. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with kind eyes and a quiet, careful way of moving, like she knew she was stepping into sacred ground. She didn't push or pry. She simply asked if we could sit in the sunroom, the very place where I'd once taught Amelia to read. I agreed. We settled into the old wicker chairs, the soft buzz of bees and the rustling of oak leaves surrounding us like a living soundtrack. Anna opened a small leather notebook and smiled gently. "Tell me your story, Mrs. Mitchell. Not just the facts. Tell me what this house means to you." For a long moment, I stared out the window, watching the sunlight slant across the cracked brick path. Then I began to speak. I told her about the house, how I bought it after my mother died, using every penny of her small life insurance policy, how Amelia and I had repainted every room ourselves, laughing and arguing and eating pizza on the bare floors, how I'd sacrificed vacations, new clothes, even a better car, just to keep the mortgage paid when times got tough. I told her about the diagnosis, the slow unraveling of my health, and how I realized that the child I had raised with love had grown into someone who saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle. And it didn't interrupt. She just listened, her pen moving silently across the page. When I finished, she asked if she could take a few photos of the house, of me sitting by the old porch swing. I hesitated at first, feeling the familiar sting of shame crawl up my neck. But then I remembered, this wasn't about exposing my pain. It was about claiming it. I nodded. "Take whatever you need." She smiled, lifted her camera, and captured the truth of me. Not the frail woman Amelia wanted the world to see, but the fighter I had become. The article came out 3 days later. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe a small blurb buried deep inside the community section. Instead, it was a full spread. The battle for home. One woman's stand against being forgotten. The photos showed the house in all its weathered beauty. The swing, the peeling white shutters, the daffodils blooming stubbornly by the fence. And there, in the center, was me. Not broken, not invisible, but standing tall. The response was immediate. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to in years showed up on my doorstep with casseroles and bouquets. Strangers sent letters, emails, even small donations to help with repairs on the house. One afternoon, a woman my age knocked timidly on the door, tears in her eyes. "I read your story," she whispered. "It felt like you were telling mine." We hugged on the porch, two wounded hearts finding strength in each other's survival. The community rallied around me in a way I hadn't dared hope for. But not everyone was pleased, especially not Amelia. It was a Sunday afternoon when she finally showed up again. I was pruning the rose bushes when her car screeched into the driveway, scattering gravel like hailstones. She slammed the door and marched toward me, her face red with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed, voice low and sharp. "Making me look like some kind of monster?" I straightened up slowly, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "I didn't name you," I said calmly. "I didn't need to. The truth speaks loud enough." Her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You humiliated me, Mom. Everyone's talking about it. You've ruined everything." I tilted my head slightly, studying her. "No, Amelia. I didn't ruin anything. You did. The day you decided I was worth less than this house." She opened her mouth to retort, but then seemed to think better of it. Her chest rose and fell in angry, shallow breaths. I could see the panic under the anger now, the dawning realization that she was losing control of the narrative, of the image she had carefully constructed of herself as the dutiful daughter. And she hated it. Good. She needed to feel what it was like to be powerless, even if only for a moment. She turned on her heel and stormed back to her car, the engine roaring to life as she sped away without a word of goodbye. I watched her go, the pruner still warm in my hand. For the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel fear. I felt free. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the cicadas began their nightly chorus, I sat on the porch swing and reread Anna's article. I let the words soak into me like rain into thirsty soil. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer someone's afterthought. I was seen. And no matter what Amelia did next, no matter how she tried to spin it, she could never erase me again. For a brief, golden moment, I thought it was over. That Amelia, faced with the reality of my strength and the weight of public sympathy, would retreat. Maybe even naively, I hoped, find a sliver of remorse in her heart. But some people don't surrender. They escalate. And Amelia was one of them. It was a Thursday when I found the letter wedged into the crack of my front door. No stamp. No return address. Just my name scrawled across the envelope in a handwriting I recognized instantly, Amelia's. I opened it slowly, already bracing myself for the worst. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly typed, coldly clinical. A formal notice. Amelia intended to sue me for elder financial abuse, accusing me of mismanaging the house's value and putting her rightful inheritance at risk. I read the words twice, 3 times, but they didn't change. She was going to take me to court again. Only this time, she wasn't pretending to care. She wasn't hiding behind a smile or fake concern. This was war, open and undisguised. And it was a war she intended to win at any cost. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, feeling the heavy, familiar ache of betrayal settle deeper into my chest. It would have been easy, so easy to crumble, to give in, to believe the whispered fears. You're too tired. You're too sick. You can't survive another battle. But those voices no longer ruled me. I thought of all the nights I had spent sitting alone in this house, believing I was invisible. And now the world knew my name. And I wasn't going back into the shadows. Not for Amelia. Not for anyone. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Callahan. He answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but reassuring. She's desperate, he said after I read the letter aloud. She knows she's lost the court of public opinion. This is her Hail Mary pass. I clenched my hand around the receiver. Can she win? There was a pause. Only if you let her. His words hit harder than I expected, because deep down I knew it was true. I wasn't just fighting for the house anymore. I was fighting for my right to be seen as a whole person, flawed, aging, stubborn, but still whole. If I gave up now, it wouldn't just be losing the house. It would be losing myself. The next few days were a frenzy of preparation. Mr. Callahan assembled a legal team. Friends and neighbors, many of whom had read the article, offered to testify on my behalf. Even Anna, the reporter, reached out privately to say that if I needed her to confirm the truth of my story, she would. Support blossomed around me like wildflowers in spring. But still, at night, alone in my bed, doubt crept in. Could I survive another public battle? Another round of accusations and cruel looks from strangers who didn't know the full story? Was it worth it? I wrestled with those questions in the darkness, feeling the weight of years of exhaustion and sacrifice pressing down on me. And then, one night, I found myself back in the sunroom, sitting in the old wicker chair where Amelia had once curled up beside me, begging for just one more story before bedtime. I closed my eyes and remembered her small hand in mine. The way she used to trust me without question. The way I had given everything I had to keep her safe, to build her a world full of light and hope. And I realized something. I had never fought for myself before. I had fought for her, for my students, for my community. But never, not once, had I stood up and said, I deserve to be protected too. And that, more than anything, was why I had to see this through. Not for revenge, not even for the house. For me. The morning of the preliminary hearing, I dressed carefully. Simple slacks, a soft blue sweater, no jewelry except my wedding ring, the one symbol of a life I had built, loved, and survived. When I arrived at the courthouse, Amelia was already there, standing stiffly beside her lawyer. She looked thinner than I remembered, harder, but when she met my gaze for the first time, I saw something else, doubt, a tiny crack in her armor, and I smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the quiet strength of someone who had finally learned how to choose herself. As the judge called the session to order and Amelia's lawyer began spinning his version of events, I sat back in my chair, hands folded in my lap, heart steady. Because win or lose, battle or no battle, I knew who I was now, and I wasn't invisible anymore. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension, like a summer sky just before a thunderstorm. I sat there, hands still, breathing slow and deliberate, as Amelia's lawyer began building his case. He painted a picture of an aging woman slipping into incompetence, clinging stubbornly to a house she could no longer maintain, jeopardizing her future and the rightful inheritance of her family. Inheritance. That word cut through the air sharper than any knife. He wasn't even pretending it was about my well-being anymore. It was about ownership, possession, reducing a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and history into numbers on a page. And there, sitting 2 tables away, was my daughter. Amelia didn't look at me once. Her eyes stayed locked on her lawyer's notes, her jaw tight with tension. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she realized how much of herself she had lost in this war, or if she cared. When it was our turn, Mr. Callahan rose smoothly. His voice was calm but cutting, weaving a tapestry of facts too solid to ignore. The living trust that protected the house, the documented evidence of my financial competence, testimonies from doctors affirming my mental soundness, letters from neighbors and friends about my independence. Piece by piece, he dismantled Amelia's case until there was nothing left but dust. And then he said something that made the entire courtroom shift. This isn't a case about protecting an elder. This is a case about entitlement, about a daughter who values property over the woman who gave her life. There was a murmur across the room. Even the judge's expression hardened slightly. For the first time, it wasn't me under the microscope. It was Amelia. The judge called for a recess before announcing her decision. I stepped out into the hall, the cool marble floors echoing under my sensible shoes. I leaned against the wall, heart pounding, hands clammy. Had I done enough? Could I withstand whatever came next? I closed my eyes, willing myself to stay strong. Mom, the voice was small, almost broken. I opened my eyes to see Amelia standing a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Gone was the confident woman who had swept into my home, dictating my future. In her place was a daughter I barely recognized. Angry, yes, but also scared. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I nodded, and we walked together to a small bench by the window. The hallway was silent except for the ticking of a distant clock. Amelia sat stiffly, staring at her hands. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said finally. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared, Mom. I waited. Let her speak. Let her peel back the layers of anger she had wrapped herself in. "You're getting older. You're sick. And I have my own life. My own bills. I thought." Her voice cracked. "I thought if I could sell the house, if I could settle things now, it would make everything easier." "Easier for who?" I asked softly. She winced. Didn't answer. I pressed on. "For you? Or for me?" Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away stubbornly. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she whispered. I didn't want to watch you get worse. I thought if I distanced myself, if I handled things like business, it would be easier." I let out a slow breath. There it was, the naked, ugly truth. She had dehumanized me because it made her grief easier to bear. But in doing so, she had betrayed the very bond that made us mother and daughter. I really looked at her for the first time in months. Not the woman who had tried to take my home, but the broken, frightened girl who didn't know how to face losing the only family she had left. And suddenly, the decision that had seemed so clear, fight to the bitter end, shut her out forever, felt less certain. Because the real battle wasn't over the house. It never had been. It was about something messier, harder to quantify. Forgiveness, redemption, boundaries that honored both love and self-respect. "I'm not giving you the house," I said finally, my voice steady but not unkind. "I'm not signing it over. I'm not leaving it for you to cash out like a business deal." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I know." But I continued. "I'm willing to find a new path forward. One with rules, boundaries, trust rebuilt from scratch." Her head jerked up, hope flashing in her eyes. "You mean—" "It's not a clean slate, Amelia," I said, my heart heavy with the truth of it. "There's too much damage for that. But it's not a death sentence either. If you want to be part of my life, not my property, my life, you'll have to earn it." She nodded again, quickly, desperately. "I will," she whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." I watched her for a long moment, weighing the risk, the cost. And then I extended my hand. Slowly, cautiously, she took it like a lifeline. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. The hallway clock struck the hour. It was time to go back into the courtroom and hear the judge's final ruling. But no matter what the verdict said, whether I won the case or simply protected the house for a little while longer, I knew one thing. The real victory was happening here, in choosing not just to fight, but to heal, on my terms, and no one else's. The courtroom was cooler now, as if the tension had seeped into the walls themselves. I walked back to my seat with Amelia trailing silently behind me. Both of us changed somehow by that quiet conversation in the hallway. I caught Mr. Callahan's questioning glance, but I only nodded. There would be time for explanations later. Now, it was time to hear the verdict. The judge returned, adjusting her glasses as she shuffled through the papers on her bench. The room hushed, breaths held, hearts pounding in unison. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, she began, her voice even, deliberate. "It is clear that Mrs. Clara Mitchell is fully competent to manage her own affairs." A wave of relief crashed over me, so strong I nearly swayed where I stood. Mr. Callahan placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, a small but powerful gesture. The judge continued. "Furthermore, the court finds that the attempts to challenge Mrs. Mitchell's autonomy were not made in good faith, but rather for personal financial interest." There was a sharp intake of breath. Amelia's, or mine, I couldn't tell. "Therefore," the judge said, looking directly at Amelia now, "this petition is dismissed with prejudice. No further attempts to challenge Mrs. Mitchell's competence will be entertained without new, compelling evidence. Dismissed. With prejudice. Final. Irrevocable. I had won. Not just the house. Not just the battle. I had won myself back." As the judge banged her gavel and the court slowly emptied, I sat there for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. This house, this life, was mine to shape, protect, and live in however I chose. No one, not even the daughter I had once loved more than anything, had the right to take that away. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, savoring the victory written into my very bones. When I turned, Amelia was still standing near the bench, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously at her sides. She looked smaller now, younger, not the adversary I had fought tooth and nail, but the daughter who had lost her way and perhaps was trying to find it again. I didn't rush to her. I didn't open my arms and erase the past. But I didn't walk away either. Outside the courthouse, the day was brilliant and clear. The magnolias were in bloom, their heavy, sweet scent filling the air. Mr. Callahan clapped me on the back once more. "You did it, Clara," he said, pride thick in his voice. "You fought the good fight, and you won." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Thank you," I said simply, "for believing in me when I forgot how." He tipped his hat, a gesture so old-fashioned and kind it made my throat tighten, and disappeared into the crowd. I was left standing there, free, truly free. Later that afternoon, I returned home. The house welcomed me like an old friend. Its creaky floors, its sun-dappled windows, the familiar scent of lavender and wood polish. I walked through each room, trailing my fingers across door frames, picture frames, memories. I ended up in the sunroom once again, where a soft breeze stirred the lace curtains. Sitting there in the worn wicker chair, I allowed myself to exhale fully for the first time in what felt like years. This was my sanctuary, my fortress, my history, and now it was my future too. I heard the soft crunch of tires on gravel. Looking out, I saw Amelia's car parked awkwardly at the end of the driveway. She didn't get out, just sat there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, shoulders tense. Finally, she opened the door and stepped out, taking slow, hesitant steps toward the porch. I didn't move to meet her. I waited, let her come to me. When she reached the steps, she stopped, wringing her hands. "Mom," she said, voice rough with emotion, "I know I don't deserve another chance, but if there's any part of you that still believes in me, I want to try. Not for the house, not for anything, for you." For a long time, I said nothing, just watched her standing there, so painfully human, so deeply flawed. And then, finally, I spoke. "You don't get my trust back all at once, Amelia," I said, voice steady. "You have to earn it. Slowly, patiently." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I will. And you don't get the house," I added firmly. "That was never what this was about." She nodded again, tears filling her eyes. "I know. It wasn't a clean ending. There were no neat bows to tie around our pain. But it was a beginning. A fragile, uncertain beginning. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough." I turned back toward the house, feeling the weight of the past loosen from my shoulders. The future wasn't clear yet. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. And for the first time, I walked into it, not as someone's afterthought, but as Clara Mitchell, mother, survivor, warrior, whole. Weeks passed after the hearing, and little by little, the house began to feel different. Not because anything had changed structurally. The floors still creaked, the shutters still rattled when the wind blew in off the river. But something inside the walls had shifted. Something inside me had shifted. The house was no longer a monument to loss, no longer a battlefield. It had become what I had always intended it to be, a sanctuary. I took my time reclaiming it. Room by room, I peeled away the layers of dust and sadness. I painted the living room a warm honey gold, a color that caught the morning light and wrapped the whole space in a gentle embrace. I planted new roses in the garden, deep red, creamy white, vibrant pink. I replaced the broken porch swing with a sturdy new one, hanging it on thick chains and piling it with soft cushions. Sometimes I would sit there in the early evenings, watching the sunset bleed across the sky, feeling the earth turn quietly beneath me, not waiting for anyone, not waiting for permission, simply being. Amelia came by sometimes, not often, not without awkwardness, but she came, bringing small offerings, a basket of fresh peaches from the farmer's market, a jar of honey, a book she thought I might like. She never asked about the house anymore, and I never offered. It was understood between us now. What had once been broken might never be fully repaired, but it could still be acknowledged, respected, maybe even slowly healed, on terms that honored both of us. One sunny afternoon, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. A blank sheet of paper sat before me. For a long while, I simply stared at it, the pen heavy in my hand. Then, without fully deciding to, I began to write. To the woman I almost forgot to be. You gave and gave until there was nothing left for yourself. You loved so hard that you mistook sacrifice for survival. You thought that being silent, being invisible, was the price you had to pay to be loved. You were wrong. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are not less because you are older, because you are tired, because you are no longer the center of someone else's world. You are enough. You have always been enough. And now, at last, you are free to live as you were meant to, not as someone's afterthought, not as someone's burden, but as your own beginning. Stand tall, be fierce, love yourself with the same relentless, breathtaking devotion you once gave away so easily. This is your house. This is your life. And this, finally, is your time. With love, Clara. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the old curio cabinet between Amelia's baby shoes and the faded photographs of summers long past. Not to hide it, but to anchor it. A reminder, a promise. As the evening light slanted across the floorboards, the house felt warm, alive. I sat back in my chair, smiling to myself. The future stretched out before me, wild and unwritten, and I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was ready, because no matter what storms might come, I knew the truth now. I had already survived the hardest one, and I was still standing. Whole, seen, home.